Hi. Like what we have seen in the last lesson, what is events and how we can use it, today we have a new event, so let's get started. The first one in our list is onload. Onload triggered when the user enters or leaves the page, most used with the body. But before we see how we can use load, let we define variables to access to the text and the input, and here the span. So the first variable text and equal to document, and the ID is text. Now let me create another one for here for the input, and the ID is input, and the last one called note. So we can use the event load to display a function once we enter the page or leave the page. So for example, let we make a function that just alert a message and called load. Let we make it access to this text and type something inside it. So text dot inner HTML equal to text here mean this variable that access to this element, and let me type the page has loaded. Let me try to reload. Of course nothing will happen, but here we can use an event onload. So once we load the page, we want to execute this function load. So here what we call the function load. Let's try. Nice. So once we load the page has loaded. There is also onchange. Onchange often used in combination with validation of input field. So here we have an input field. Let me see how does it work. So input dot onChange equal to a function, and this function I want when I type anything inside this input, I want it to be appeared here within the text. So when we reload the page, the text will be the page has loaded, but when we type anything inside this input field, it will appear instead of the old text. So I want the text that inner HTML to be equal to the value of the text. So input dot value, which is the value of this text. So let's try. So when we reload, the page has loaded, but if we type something, it will equal to the value of the input. Also we can make it change the text inside the input to be uppercase letter. So here we can make the input dot value, which is the value of the input, equal to input dot value, the old value of the input dot to uppercase, which is a function that convert the letters to be uppercase letters. So let me reload. If we type lowercase like this and then click outside the input, it will change the letters to be uppercase. Also there is another trick, we will use it in the advanced lessons. Here instead of input I can say this. Let me see if there is any wrong or not. So the same thing. So this means the function that we are in now. So we now are in a function that belongs to the input. So instead of using the variable input, I can use this, which means this input. And also the same thing here and here. The same thing. Let me now see the third event, which is onfocus, which change something or do a certain action once start using a certain element. Like when we click here on the input, I want a message or a note that appear to the user. Let me see. So input dot onfocus equal to a function, and this function is I want to display a message here within the span. So note dot inner HTML equal to, for example, let we type please insert a valid data. Let me see. So when we click the input, there is a message will appear. Please insert a valid data. So now when we reload the page has loaded using onload event. And then when we click, there is a message will appear using onfocus. Now when we type anything inside this input, it will be changed once we click outside this input. The last event is oninput or onkeyup. They both do the same job, but there is a little difference. Let me see. Firstly, let me try oninput. It occurs when the value of an input is changed. It's similar to onchange, but the difference is it occurs immediately after we insert a value inside this input, or the value of the input has been changed. Not like the onchange. Onchange, I have to click outside the input so I can see the action. So here, let we make input dot on input and equal to function this time I just want to display the value of the input within this paragraph element, like onchange. So text dot inner HTML equal to input dot value, or this dot value, the same thing. Let us try. So when we start typing anything, it will appear within the paragraph, but if we click outside the input, it will display within the text, which is now execute the function onchange. When we insert something inside the input or delete something, this event is on input, but if we click outside the input, this is on a change event. Also the same thing is on key up, but let me see the difference. So if we type anything, the same thing, it will appear, but if we keep pressing, you can see the change until I stop typing. You can now see the text, but for an input, let me return back to an input. Once we inserting something, we can see the value, and the same thing if I remove something. So as you see, on input change immediately once we change the value of the input, but on change occurs when we click outside the input. On keyup, the same thing like on input, but If we keep pressing or keep deleting, we can't see the result until we stop. So those are the most popular events in JavaScript. In the first part, I've explained mouse events like onClick, onDoubleClick, onMouseOver, and so on. In this lesson, we explained onload, onchange, onfocus, oninput, and onkeyup. So try to practice those events because we will use it so much in the next lessons. So good luck with that and see you next time.